Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. Not a lot of news when it comes to EVE Online, of course. It is the last week before EVE Vegas, where in EVE Online keynote is on the books, so I think that's good news. And as I was expecting, I think we'll get more details on what CCP has planned for the game at EVE Vegas, and until then I do feel like the market is going to be on a little bit of a standby mode, waiting for actual news and then trying to decide where to go. If CCP succeeds in creating some hype, of course, that usually is the time for plex to start to rally again. But on the other hand, I've just been thinking about that actually. This is also the time when, well, EVE Vegas, the holidays are coming, where CCP might put out more sales. So it is going to be interesting looking forward. I do think that EVE Vegas, once we know more, will be paramount to our decisions when it comes to the market. First of all, we'll also take a quick look at the New Eden store. And as I've said, I'm not expecting sales right now, but with EVE Vegas, with the holidays coming, that is entirely possible. Honestly, I would hold off on purchasing stuff at the moment. I would wait for a better opportunity later down the line, which should come before the end of the year. We still have the Snowline Blade Racer skins front and center. We get some bundles next, but as you can see, we have no sales or anything like that going on in the New Eden store. I would exert a little bit of patience and try to get a better deal, basically. Next up, let's get started on the market itself. As always, we'll start with plex and stuff, and that's coming in at 155. And let's take a look at that. So here is the plex chart. You can see, in my opinion, it is more hesitation. We are going up just a little bit above 3.5 million on a couple of days, and just below that 5-day moving average is up a little bit, but you can clearly see that even from last month in September, we're still below the tops and above the bottom, which went as low as like 3.2 million. Or very close to that. So this to me is an indication that the market is indeed on standby. If you take a look at what's being sold, it's just below 3.5 million now for the sellers, and the buyers are coming in at just above 3.4 million. Super narrow margin between the sellers and the buyers, and that again is also a sign of a market in a holding pattern. And as I've said, what could change this balance, basically, this is clearly a good that has found its range and its balance just shy of 3.5 million. Would of course be an announcement by CCP or sales happening, which would increase the volumes dramatically and usually has a downwards pressure on the price. Hype, on the other hand, could bring in more demand. Next up, the multiple pilot training certificate. Let's take a look at that. Very same thing, of course, actually a holding pattern since pretty much the end of the summer, where we have been just below 1.5 billion. Slight trend upwards, but it's hardly noticeable. We are talking a little bit below 1.5 billion for the sellers and a bit above 1.4 billion for the buyers. It's the very same thing, of course. Really narrow margin for such an expensive item that of course also represents a full month of Omega training time. So it is normal that this is quite expensive, but the margin is really narrow. Next up, we have the skill extractors, which of course follows plex very narrowly since it's a one-on-one conversion, going for just above 400 million in a couple of days. But you can again see the 5-day moving average edging up, but still well away from any peaks or lows. And we're talking just below 400 million for the sellers and 386 million for the buyers. This is a 13 million margin. Well, it's actually 400 million, like, no, 399 for the sellers. This is really a pretty narrow margin again for a pretty expensive item. And then we'll move on to the injectors, which, okay, interesting. A little bit of a drop, getting back down to 800 million ISK on a couple of days. Today's a little bit higher, but we're actually seeing a slight edge of pressure here. 820 million on the sellers and 794 for the buyers. And that's actually pretty normal, of course. Skilling spree is back, so you can just log in get rid of 1 to 5 rats, I think, for 10,000 to 50,000 skill points. That should decrease the mod for skill injectors a little bit. And on top of that, CCP decided to add a login event this week, which I think is aimed at bringing people back after the summer or after the blackout. That's up to you to decide, of course, but this is very much an incentive, of course, to get back. On top of that, Omega, so subscribers get a lot more skill points from that as well. And yeah, all of that though is going to lower the demand for skill injectors a little bit, and we can see that through the market price as well. For these small skill injectors, I would actually expect a bigger move on that, and it's not. It's very flat at the moment. Why did I expect like a bigger move on this? Because what you gain is actually in the smaller chunks, and if you really want to build a character, you'll go for the large skill injectors, and these small skill injectors tend to, I think, be the first casualty of a free SP being handed out in the game. These are going for 164 million ISK for the first seller, buyers coming in at 152, which is again just an let's see, 12 million ISK margin, less than 10% on the sell and the buy price. That is definitely not a lot. Maybe a quick look at the large scale injector margin. Haven't checked that out. Actually 820, 794, so that is a 26 million. Yeah, that's definitely, you'd need like 79 million as a margin for 10%, so that is also really narrow. And finally, we have the daily alpha injectors, which after a sale dip down. You can again see that big volume increase, a decrease in the price. You had an opportunity to buy these for very close to 40 million ISK, and the jump back up is quite large, up to 52 million already, buyers up to 45 million. This is still pretty cheap. You can still, I think, grab some of that volume well below average right now, but of course you're not at the bottom price anymore. I think what might be influencing this fast increase could be the new video that CCP released, another EVE Online video, basically really aimed at the newer players, explaining some of the basics, what to expect, and giving some nice tips in like 3 to 4 minutes or something like that. It was very well made in my opinion, and it might just incentivize people to give the game another go. And well, we know from a lot of the comments that CCP is very heavily investing in the new player experience, trying to increase retention of people that try EVE Online into the game. And so yeah, this is probably like a first opening salvo in what we can expect at EVE Vegas. I am really curious myself for these plans. Next up, we'll move on to the mineral market, coming in at 745. Like that, and you may already have seen from the ticker that it's not good news for titanium. That should be a sharp drop, and oh, that is a very sharp drop. So we managed to get back to 7 ISK. That was really nice during the blackout. Of course, the blackout was a very big nerf to Rorcal mining. The safety there went down substantially, and titanium took major advantage of that, going from less than 5 ISK to 7 ISK. That was a very nice increase in price. 7 ISK, even historically not a bad price for titanium, not a peak either, but definitely very respectable. And now that all of that is over, and I think basically that the summer is over as well, I do think that activity will slowly be increasing again. The supply is increasing, and we have these lower prices. All the gains from titanium will have to be given back eventually, if nothing major like a big war, something like that happens in nullsec. Sellers are coming in. Well, it was 606 when I was coming in to take a look for the ticker, and by then, so that's, you can see that in like the last 15 minutes we've got 2, 3, 4, 5 billion units that have come in, driving the price of sellers down to 6 ISK already, and buyers are down to 535. Get some bigger orders. These will probably actually get filled pretty quickly as well. We can expect us to go back towards that 5 ISK range decently quickly, in my opinion. Another one that was doing decently well was Pyrite, and here we also clearly see a trend break. So we had that slow move up, and actually a surprisingly strong September month for Pyrite, managing to still make its way from 4.5 to 5 ISK, and now back down. All of a sudden the trend break is here. We're talking 474 for the sellers and 471 for the buyers. That's a much narrower margin, smaller volumes, so It's just gonna take like a little bit more time to fill in all these buy orders, but eventually I do think, unfortunately, that at the moment we are heading back down substantially for minerals across the board as the summer and the blackout ends. Number one casualty actually was Mixon, which already started a decline during the blackout in July and August. Again, it's my personal theory that a major reason for that is that the more safe alternative to just straight up Rorcal mining in belts was of course mining on moons, because you had your own structure there that could help with the defense. And as a result, I do think that Nullsec has basically fine-tuned all their options when it comes to moon mining. Mexlon was the bottleneck for local production, and that's just become part of the equation. So we have this 1 year low point. We went to less than 40 ISK and we're still there now. 43 for the sellers, but 38.10 for the buyers. And from the average price, you can clearly see that more often than not, players, suppliers just sell straight to those buy orders rather than wait for a sell order above 40. There is little patience in the market for Mexlon, which is basically a consequence, of course, of this massive drop over the summer that has only now stalled at a 1 year low point. Next up, we have our Noxium market, which was in the very same situation, except it started a little bit later for the decline. Managed to hold on to 300 ISK for most of the year. Very impressive performance actually. And here again, I think it's the very same theory that is going to hold true. Noxium had already lost a lot of ground, but actually managed to defend itself very well despite lots of declines over the year. For instance, you can see Tritanium was already super low, and then for Pyrite was also super low. Noxium was actually at a higher point, and all of that is now being negated, I think, by the fine-tuning of the mineral mixes in Nullsec through moon mining. So at the moment we are selling this for less than 230 ISK. Buyers are coming in at 216. The market has basically found a bottom at this current range. After that, we've got Isogen. Poor Isogen actually going for a 1 year low point. Another one that was having a very tough time in the mineral market, being massively oversupplied, just based on the needs of in the game at any given time. This used to be worth more than Mixon by quite a bit. I think a price of like 150 ISK or something like that was absolutely normal, and you can see that we had gone down to 15 ISK before, and right now we're actually at yet another 1 year low point, probably close to an all-time low point, with sellers coming in at less than 15 ISK and buyers at 14.15. Yeah, Isogen is the biggest casualty in my opinion of the Rorcal rebalance, moon mining, and the mineral rebalance in Nullsec that happened a couple of years ago. After that, we still have our former Nullsec minerals. If I'm actually switch those two up. Normally I look at Isogen first and then I add Noxium. Sorry about that, guys. But we still have our Nullsec minerals to take a look at, and here we've got Zydrine that, alright, has a little bit of a surprise comeback in the last couple of days here, trying to get back to more than 450 ISK and succeeding. 483 for the sellers, but 422 for the buyers. So it's basically a little bit of a stalling in supply that is increasing the sell prices, but the buyers are not budging. They're saying, we know there's more supply out there, we want that cheap Zydrine, bring it to us. And right now it's just not really materializing. It's gonna be interesting to see in the upcoming weeks if buyers are eventually forced up, or if new supply just steps in to take advantage of that relatively good price of 482 for Zydrine. And Megasite has been struggling as well, of course, over the last year, starting out at 600 ISK and is currently selling for less than 400, 387 for the sellers, 358 for the buyers, continually giving back ground. We're very close to another 1 year low point. That's at 350. Buyers are very close to that. So the general trend in the mineral market, I think, is pretty clear. Lots of pressure across the board. I think, the Nullsec blackout has been absorbed, and the fact that summer is ending, activity is probably decreasing. That means, yeah, Rorcals are coming back, supplies are coming back online, and thus we have this pressure. Next up, we have the PI market. That's coming in at 1430. Okay, and we'll take a look at this. Of course, I am personally expecting a little bit of a comeback pressure, just because we're seeing that first sign that activity is coming back to the game after the summer slump, in my opinion. And in the PI section, we had a big slump in September, basically. I think a delayed slump for PI due to that lower activity. But in September, we did see a lot of them go very low. And in the last couple of weeks, we saw that this was slowly starting to make its way back up. And we can, for instance, see that broadcast nodes did manage to go to 2.3 million about 10 days ago. It's giving back a little bit of ground, but 2 million is its average. We're still selling for well above 2.1 million. The buyers are at 1.8 million though, so they still want to try that cheap, to get that cheap PI market. But the big difference, of course, I think, is that suppliers are savvy about this. They know that they just need a little bit of patience. Eventually, demand will start to compete again towards higher prices, and so that is why right now the sellers are winning out. Nobody is going to, or next to nobody is going to sell straight to these buyers with that larger margin. And I think eventually it's the sellers that will win out, and the buyers will lose patience and will be forced up a little bit. Construction blocks here, we had that actually a delayed slump here. I was expecting this to happen either in the summer. Skilling spree stopped that, and then in September we had a little bit of hesitation, but then we clearly had a trend break going down to less than 8,000 disc. But we're already back to 9,600 for the sellers, 8,700 for the buyers. So here that slump is already over. Of course, a big part of that is investments. People notice this clear trend break and just try to grab it. Let's take a quick look if I actually bought some of this myself. I really should have, and I didn't. But yeah, construction blocks already making its way back towards the average price. Consumer electronics, this was the September slump that I was talking about. Still not doing it too well. And let's see how far from 11,000 we're on the buyers. No, it's actually 10,000 for the buyers, 12,400 for the sellers. Again, a wide margin opening up between sellers and buyers. And so this indicates that supplies are either not that forthcoming. Like you see in the last 24 hours, just 3 sell orders. And then we gotta go 4 days earlier for another 4. So either supplies are just not really materializing that much, or and demand is decently low still. The real question is, which one is going to buckle first? Will we see more supply come in, people becoming impatient, driving this price down, or will we see demand actually pick back up and have the buyers go up here? I personally thought that we would start to see the buyers go up. That hasn't materialized in the consumer electronics just yet. We're still hovering well below average at this point, although the sellers, 12,400, are trying to get back to a normal price. Next up here we've got coolants. This one is actually doing quite okay. An average price for coolants, historically speaking, I think is more like 10 to 11,000 discs. So we actually had a really good year in this fuel related PI market. 13,300 for the sellers, that's not so bad. 11,500 for the buyers. You can see that demand is picking up, in my opinion, with all these buyers in the last 24 hours, although they're just very slowly driving the price back up. And what to me is pretty interesting is that this is yet again a pretty large margin, and this is the first one where competition on the buy side is clearly outstripping competition on the sell side. So we have this slow move up in a rather jagged way, but I think that this will start to show up in other PI markets soon as well. Enriched uranium had a very strong summer with actually a 1-year high point in September up to 17,000 disc, currently selling for 14,000 or even 15,000 on most of them. So we've got a little bit of dumping happening on a couple of sell orders here, or is that competition from... No, that's not competition from the player-owned trade hubs. Buyers are coming in at 13,000 discs though, so this is just, I want to get rid of that right now, basically, but make it on the disc. You should really then just sell, I think, straight to these buyers. But yeah, 15,000 disc I think is gonna be there pretty soon for the sellers, 13,000 for the buyers. Clearly still above average. The big difference between enriched uranium coolants and the previous 3 is of course that this is tied to fuels. I think it has a much more steady demand as well. Integrity response drones, let's see, clearly below average on the chart, close to 2.25 million here. Sellers are coming in at 2.4 million almost. Again, look at supply, not that much, nothing too crazy. And then buyers are forced up to 2.25 million. well, basically at 2.25 million. This one is in flux, basically. The margin is not that high just yet, I think because of the high availability of the good itself. So this is apparently not the turnaround week yet that I was personally expecting to see. Mechanical parts is breaking out of the rut here, went to less than 10,000. This is clearly, you can see hesitation throughout the summer months, going down to 11,000 disc, which is like slightly below average. But then in September, nope, it just wasn't working anymore. Supply was way too high for demand, and so we had to slump down to less than 10,000 disc. We're slightly recovering from that, so we can see 10,003 to 400 for the sellers, 9,652 for the buyers. Last 24 hours, just 3 sell orders. Couple days ago, just 2 sell orders. But then here on the buy side, you can clearly see that in the last 24 hours, more people have come in with a lot more demand than supply. I think the turnaround is in the works. It's just not uniform just yet. Apparently, fuel-related PI materials are, leading the way there. Next up, we have the nuclear reactors. After a surprisingly strong performance, all of a sudden going up to 110,000 disc, is slumping back down. 94,000 for the sellers, 82 to 83,000 for the buyers. This is of course a really weird market because it's lacking volumes at all to actually have like good sales or active trading, in my opinion. So what we see here, in my opinion, is that just on a complete lack of supply, prices went up to above 100,000 disc, and then this volume spike is basically people dumping their nuclear reactors, hoping to still sell at that slightly better price, but demand is next to non-existent. And so as a result, over the course of the last week, we just started dumping 104, 109, 95,000, and then we're very quickly going down towards 94,000, putting that pressure right back on next to no sales, of course. Only a couple of people will have managed to sell at a better price. So this is a terrible market because demand is just non-existent. Organic mortar applicators, all right, so price pressure at the tail end here. This was basically what I was expecting. The September slump and then the recovery going back to 1.1 million on average. Nope, this one is hesitating again. Sellers coming in at less than a million ISK. Buyers, you can see there's not that many buyers at 962, really narrow margin here. So this is despite the fact that not that many sellers are coming in. This is clearly an oversupplied market by quite a bit. Easily bought for less than a million ISK. So that's, look at the rest of the chart. 1.1 to 1.2 million is possible. Is this a worthy investment? In Vegas, will they announce a new structure that perhaps still has an influence on local in 0.0? It might still happen, although I think the chances are pretty low considering the 80% focus on new player experiences. Next up, we've got the robotics that also went again with the September slump. It's now bottoming out in October. We can see that we are breaking the trend on the 5-day moving average, which is the blue line. 92,000 for a couple sellers. Most are coming in at 98,000, which is already much closer to 100k, which I would put at the even above average. So sellers, trying to get back to that average. A couple of people are spoiling the party. But it can happen. And then buyers are still at 89,000 ISK, although here again I do think that half a page of new buy orders and half a page of new sell orders, this is gonna take a little bit more time. Here demand and supply is coming back a little bit more, so we're still below average, unfortunately, on the chart. Self-harmonizing power cores, double peak in late August and early October. This is very surprising for an advanced PI material. We would expect this to work a lot more like the organic mortar applicators, because it is usually tied to the construction of structures at the moment, which is not really expecting or there's no reason to expect high demand or anything like that. And despite that, double peaks to 2.4 and 2.3 million ISK. Now selling for less than 2 million, buyers below 1.8 million. So here we clearly have, look at that, last 24 hours going from 2 million to just below that. But all of that supply is way more than this is just the demand. Can't scroll on that. And so unfortunately here, they're tanking the price yet again. Then we've got the superconductors. That one is trying to get back to a more average price as well. 11,600 for the sellers, 10,600 for the buyers, and half a page of new demand, but also pretty much half a page of new supply. Yeah, it's a bit more balanced, but at least we're out of the September rut here. And now we've got the test cultures. Yeah, those are staying below 8,000. Well, sellers are up to 8,400, buyers at 7,000. That's pretty large margin for the price range. New supply, not that much. New demand, that's a little bit better. Okay, the first signs of recovery, in my opinion, in demand are here as well. And then finally we've got the wetware mainframes that had a really bad September, going for less than 2 million ISK. Normal price 2.25 million, peaks up to 2.5. That was definitely a good chance. That has recovered as well. 2.26 million to 7 for the sellers and 2 million for the buyers. Decent margin again, more than 10%, but we're back on a more average price after the September slump. I thought more goods in the PI segment would see this recovery. I am though seeing quite a few signs that demand is picking up with all the fresh buy orders coming in. So the PI market is still a bit of a mixed picture. Not the best time to sell for sure, but I think with a bit of patience we will get back to more normal prices. Next up, the advanced bone minerals coming in at 25.55. Like that. Let's take a look at these in order, of course. First of all, we've got crystalline carbonite, and this is a major surprise for me. I thought that across the board we would have further decreases to less than average prices. Crystalline carbonites on big volumes shooting up from 140 ISK to 158 for the sellers, 153 for the buyers. They've been forced up a little bit as well, back to a slightly above average price for the sellers. Very interesting, completely unexpected. I don't have an explanation. Must be something nullsec related, I think, or maybe this is big speculation by the market itself. That's a pretty big volume spike to create that increased price. Next up we have the Fernite Carbide that is actually staying just below 150 ISK as well. Is a surprise to me. We get decent volumes here, and we're talking 149 for the sellers, 144 for the first buyer. It goes down to 125 pretty quickly, but managing to defend this average price decently well. I thought pressure here would continue throughout October, but it hasn't. Interesting. Then we get titanium carbide that is also holding on quite nicely to 200 ISK here. 207 for the sellers, 195 for the buyers. That's pretty narrow margin. Supply nothing crazy. Demand, decent demand here as well in the fresh buy orders. Volumes dropping down a little bit, but pretty strong performance over actually pretty much the last month or so for titanium carbide, holding strong. And now we've got tungsten carbide that was actually declining, as you can see here in the September months, which was the trend that I was personally expecting, bouncing off of the 175. Sellers are up to 195, buyers are up to 182, at least a couple of them. That is interesting, should be able to maintain that as well. So for the carbide materials, that is surprisingly strong over the last week. Then we have our metamaterials that are of course created from those, if I'm not mistaken. Photonic metamaterials holding at a slightly below average price, but this holding is actually pretty good against what I was expecting. 16,700 for the sellers, 16,300 for the buyers. Very narrow margin at a slightly below average price. Plasmonic metamaterials next. Here we do see a little bit of pressure, but it's gotta be mentioned, of course, that we're coming down from 25,000 ISK, which is pretty much a high point for plasmonic metamaterials as well. Normal average price, I would put it closer to 20,000 ISK. Sellers coming in at 21.6k, buyers at just below 20,000 ISK. So this is still selling above average despite the decrease in price in September and October here. So that's actually decently good as well. And then we've got the non-linear metamaterials. This one is not doing so well here. We had a decently strong summer with peaks up to 30,000 ISK, but now we are declining. 24,000 for the sellers, 22,000 for the buyers. And here you can see that we have a bit of a lack of demand that is creating problems. Supplies keep piling up, and so they are driving the price down to well below average all of a sudden. Considering what we've seen for the other goods, I would call this a slight buy opportunity. This could really be your time to pick this up below average, considering that most of the others are not below average. Terahertz Metamaterials actually did really well as well, trying to defend 25,000 disc. Has to give some ground on new supply, 23,000 for the sellers. You can see a couple of days ago 24/7 was still on the books, and then now sellers are coming in at 23,000 with more supply. Buyers at 22,000 though, so this is 22k, trying to stay around average as well, coming from a 1-year high too in September. That's actually important to note. So for the carbides and the metamaterials, actually not that bad. The one exception are the non-linear metamaterials, and I would dare to put up a buy order of that, to be honest. Then we still have the other advanced materials like fermionic condensates, and that's a different picture, of course. 1-year low point heading for 80,000 disc, 81,000 for the sellers and 81,000 for the buyers. If we consider this chart to be the normal one, then this is obviously the time to grab some of these super cheap fermionic condensates. Then we get Ferrogel, same pressure, also 1-year low point. We're talking 43,400 for the sellers, 41,100 for the buyers, trying to defend 40k. That's down here on the chart. So this as well, 1-year low point, definitely an opportunity to stack below the entire chart. Fullerite was alright, holding on, but it's still below 1,000 discs, so that is not great. Basically super stable, 950 for the sellers, 910 for the buyers, but not at a great price. Hypersynaptic fibers actually had a really strong summer as well, with peaks up to 15,000 disc, and now here the pressure is just not stopping. We're back to 12k, more a normal price, I would say. 12,600 for the sellers and 11,750 for the buyers. Yeah, that's right around 12,000 disc. So not a 1-year low point, but clearly the good times of the last summer and fall are over here. Nano transistors, that one is finally coming down a little bit. Really strong summer in September, up to 6,000 disc, which was on complete lack of supply. We've seen the last 24 hours, for instance, a little bit more supply coming in, but still trying to sell at 6,000 disc. Buyers are still forced up to 5,200 disc, so nano transistors still selling for well above average. Then we have our phenolic composites that is bouncing off the 2000 disc range, which is okay in my opinion. Actually still 2100 for the sellers, 2000 for the buyers. It's not the slump down here to 1500, so this is still a little bit below average probably, considering where we come from early on in the year, but still a decent performance. And then ceramic fibers, that one unfortunately going to 400 disc. Sellers are at 408, buyers are at 392. It's not yet the complete slump, on a bit of demand here with new buy orders in the last 24 hours, but clearly well below average as well for the ceramic fibers. So what a difference between basically the metamaterials and the carbides, and then everything else that is mostly under pressure quite a bit, while the first category is actually holding on decently well. What will that mean for the Tech 2 ships? Well, we'll take a look, and that's coming in at 32.45. Like that. First of all, of course, we've got the Aries that is slumping down over the last week. Average price going below 25 million, 25.4 million for the sellers, but 22.4 million for the buyers, on bit of a lack of demand, pretty obviously. 22.5, not yet the 1-year low point, but you're buying very close to that, so could be an opportunity. Next up, we've got the Basilisk. We're seeing some more pressure here as well, heading for 200 million on average, 205 for the sellers, 191 for the buyers. If you try to get like 190 to show up here, you can clearly see that you are buying below the entire chart. Would make sense. You guys know, if you follow the channel, that I've made my investments in the stealth bombers. Like 20-25 million a piece is a lot more doable, I think, than going straight for the 200 million mark. That's all relative, of course, but clearly the logistics cruisers are also cruisers that react very strongly on NOSIC demand, on wars, on losses, and so this is clearly a 1-year low point as well, where you could take advantage of that, but you need around 200 million is just to risk the investment. Potential upside though, 300 million, 50% profit, that is not bad, of course. So This is another one that you could definitely try to grab at least a couple of those. Keep an eye on the volumes though. You can clearly see a lack of demand because the volumes are down. Once that picks back up, you can see that we go towards these high points. So I'd say if like me you're expecting activity to come back, especially with some good eVegas announcements, then it would make a lot of sense to actually try and take advantage of this. The Cerberus is actually just bouncing back a little bit from that opportunity right now. So we are talking 245 million for the sellers, 210 million for the buyers. That's basically a little bit late. You want to buy close to 200 million, I think, for the Cerberus to be sure. The Crow is under pressure as well. Low point is 25 million. Buyers are below 25 million, 28 for the sellers. It's a possibility as well. One thing to note though, the volumes of this are not great. Then we get another logistics cruiser. Last week was the buy opportunity. We went down to 190 million. It's now 215 for the sellers, still 193.5 for the buyers. That is really low. Let's see if it is possible for me to create something in that range. 193. Yeah, that's gonna be down here somewhere. So you're still buying below the entire chart. Yeah, not a logistics cruiser. You can also see the lack of volumes a little bit compared to the peaks. And so if you could buy for, let's say 195, and you could potentially sell for 280, that's another potentially very nice trade despite the jump up here, which I think would indicate a lack of supply. Nobody is willing to bring Guardians to the market at the current price anymore. Well, next to nobody. So I still decided to try and sell 7 of them at the lowest price of 214 million ISK. So it probably won't last too long, I think. This is another logistics cruiser that potentially I think makes a good investment. Heretic Interdictor, that one is still basically in no man's land, struggling to get back in the meta. 70 million for the sellers, 60 million for the buyers. Well, we've been here most of the year. Basically, if you wanted some heretics as an investment at around 60 million ISK, you would have them by now. So that's just more of the same. The Hound on this dip, as you may know, I tried to buy 5 of them for 22 million. Haven't succeeded on all of them. I did manage to buy one. 25.4 for the sellers, 23 million still for the buyers, but 449. That pressure does still exist. My buy order still exists as well, but it's a big gamble. Basically, we do need to be crushed by supply in the next week, I think, for that to still trigger. If it's past Vegas, I don't think it's gonna happen anymore. After that, we've got the Ishtar, surprisingly strong performer, actually going still for around 250 million, which is slightly above average. 246 for the sellers, 233 for the buyers. Yeah, this one is obviously not at a low point, so I'd stay clear of investing in the Manticore for now. In the Ishtar for now, excuse me. Manticore, on the other hand, is one of my investments as well. Went as low as 22 million. Let's see if it's actually in the ticker that I put this or not. No. It's still in the trying to buy. So I bought Manticores for 22 million ISK, and we can see that we are already recovering back above 25 million, 28 in fact for the sellers, 25 million for the buyers. So I could already take like a slight profit from this, but of course we're gonna wait for a 30 million plus, hopefully, after eVegas. So I bought that dip, and I'm very happy that I did so. And then keep an eye on this. Basilisk is in that dip. Guardian is just crawling out of that dip. The buyers are still in there. So as a result, this is, I think, still your opportunity. The Stealth Bombers, it's gonna be a little bit late, perhaps also slightly because of my video on it, but in the logistics cruises, I think the opportunity still lingers. Next up, we get the Munin. Very interesting to see that one drop off to, well, 230 million on the chart. Not yet a 1 year low point, but this is in the meta for the Imperium, biggest group in the game. 230 million for the sellers, 214 for the buyers. Well, I could clearly buy this well below average at the moment. Then the Nemesis, another stealth bomber, another dip that I bought at 22 million. You can clearly see the recovery here, 27 27.3 for the sellers, 23 million for the buyers. I could already sell at a slight profit. We are going to be a bit more patient than that. Olnero's logistics cruiser actually going back to an above average price, 203 for the sellers, but 178 for the buyers. That's a really big margin, big disadvantage for the Olneros. The complete lack of volume is going to be difficult to make those trades. Purifier, Stealth Bomber, still lingering on the dip, so this is one that you could still grab at the same range as what I did, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see here. I bought this for 22 million. It's 22.5 million now for the buyers, 23.7 for the sellers. Look at the lack of fresh supply though. Look at the numbers going down here on the Purifier. This won't last very long anymore, but you can still grab them well below the chart. Then we get the Saber. Okay, I'm really actually 60 million again. 56 million now for the buyers and 63 million for the sellers. If you haven't done any investments in the interdictors and you still want to do one, obviously you can try to grab a Saber now for even lower than the 60 million bottom that we've seen throughout most of the year here. Next up, we get the Scimitar, also quite a bit of hesitation, back down to 200 million, 204 for the sellers, 195 for the buyers. And that's again another logistics cruiser that you could now grab for 200 million ISK. Potential upswing 250 to 280 is definitely possible, not as pronounced as the Basilisk. Basilisk volumes 50 showing, Guardian volumes 50 showing, and then the Scimitar tends to be a little bit below that, but it's still okay. The upswing potential is just a little bit lower. And then finally we get the Stiletto, that is also under pressure. 26 million for the sellers, 25.6 million for the buyers. That's unfortunately not a big drop off in demand here, so yeah, not the one that I would make a move on. But Stealth Bombers, well, I made my moves. You can still make your move on the Purifier. And then when it comes to logistics cruisers, I think, yeah, Basilisk makes sense, Guardian makes sense, and Scimitar as well, although I think with the lowest upswing potential here. Very interesting time for the Tech 2 ships, of course, and here again, if Vegas, is that going to be the turnaround moment? We'll keep a close eye on it, of course. Next up, the Tech 3 market, coming in at 41.20. So last week the Tech 3 market was starting to worry me a little bit. We had, in my opinion, the first signs of oversupply starting to show up across the board, especially in the cruisers. We saw really low prices with decent availability. So let's start as always with the destroyers. Here is the Confessor, clearly now going for a price below 40 million. Is still trying to hold on to an average price, but we're talking 39 million for the sellers, but 32.7 for the buyers. Bit of demand dip, despite the fact that in the last 24 hours we do have a full page here of new buy orders. And then supply wise, well, again, 44, 22, 36, 35, 18. It's a little bit, and all of this is in the last 24 hours. It's a bit more than what we're used to, luckily for on the buy side as well, but the margin is pretty large, and so this is dangerous. It's not terrible just yet. We're basically selling slightly below the 40 million, which we've comfortably been able to sell at over the last half year or so. But it is pretty clear that supplies are increasing as well. So this is a little bit dangerous. Let's take a look at the Hecate next. Now also landing on a 40 million ISK here. Just above that for the sellers, 38 million still for the buyers. And then note, more than half a page in the last 24 hours, and it used to be a couple in the 20s and then most of them below 10. Here now 24, 23, 26, 23. Most of them are actually now in the 20s to 30s. That's a lot of ships coming in again. Compared that to the quantities that the buy orders want, this is clearly supplying more than what the market needs at the moment, and so we get this downward pressure on the price. Will this start to break through 40 million across the board? That is, I think, the danger zone. Hecate has already done so, clearly below 40 million ISK at this point, 38.6 for the sellers, 36 million for the buyers, so the margin is pretty narrow. And here, this is actually a little bit of like relief. we don't see across the board higher volumes coming in for the Jackdaw, but you do see less supply coming in because of that lower price. So there is still a little bit of hesitation on the market to just oversupply everything, which I think is good news. Keep the market healthy so that the margins can stay in the tech tree production chains. But yeah, the Confessor and the Hecate are still worrying me a little bit. Let's take a look at the Zwepel, staying below 40 million as well. 39 to 39.5 for most sellers, 36 for the buyers. And then here again, last 24 hours full page. This is a bit more normal, right? Around half of them are 20s, 30s and one of 46. The rest of them at least is smaller, so this is not as big of a rush. This is not as bad as last week. Basically last week across the board we had a lot more pressure, more supply than demand by quite a mile. Zwepel and Jackdaw seem to be stalling on the supply side, and it's actually normal. They are trading for less than 40 million ISK, and then the Confessor is now diving below that 40 million range, and this should basically start to stop. If this like dries up and stalls a little bit by next week, I think the market can still be okay, but it is clearly a lot more supply than what we have seen over the last few months coming in the destroyer market. Then we have our cruisers, Legion continuing the downtrend to a 1-year low point, 139 million for the sellers, 125 million for the buyers. We had a summer slump here as well, early summer slump in May and July. A big thing then was zero supply basically. Here you can see that we have some competition, we have some availability that is driving the price back down. Yeah, I think a couple of Legions at this price range, it does make sense. They're still used quite often in big 0-0 fleets. They are powerful ships, and right now you're buying 1-year low point below the entire chart. It would make sense as an investment potentially, I think, to try and snag these. I don't think they'll go that much lower than what we're seeing here, so should be something to make a move on. Loki, very same thing. Again, I have the May-July slump, which was on zero availability. Now we've broken through that 1-year low point, going for 145 million for the sellers, 138 for the buyers. And a big difference over the last week, all of this came in, so there's still competition with 20. Look at that, decent availability, decent supply. That is driving the price back down. You're grabbing Lokis for less than 140 million ISK. That is obviously pretty cheap considering the upswing. Unless someone has an explanation as to why tech tree cruisers across the board are going down the drain. I think that especially the Legion right now and the Loki as well make a lot of sense. Then we get a Proteus, 142 for the sellers, 133, and then down to 129 very quickly for the buyers. It's not a 1-year low point just yet, but the buyers are very close to that, and availability of the Proteus is worse. It is of course also the least popular tech tree cruiser in the game as well. And then finally we get Tengu that bounced back a little bit as well compared to last week, but is still well below average. 144 for the sellers, 131 and then 125, even 124 for the buyers. 124, let's see if we can get that to show up on the chart. It's gonna be down here somewhere. So yeah, the Tengu in my opinion makes sense as well to try and grab from a cheap buy order. Luckily, we had this slump here in May, June as well. The big difference here, we actually have healthy supply to go together with that slump, except in the Proteus, a little bit of a weird one. So you might want to be careful when it comes to that one. But the Legion, I mean, that's a juicy chart. That's something that I think you want to take advantage of. That's something that I think I want to take advantage of. And then we still have the extra product for the week. Of course, I chose faction battleships because there's something of note that happened there, coming in at 48 minutes. Let's take a look at those faction battleships. So here we do go into the category, we get battleships, faction battleships, and we'll start as always with the pirate faction battleships. Here is the Barghest. You can clearly see trading a little bit below average, still costing 800 million for the sellers, 630 for the buyers. You can see that's quite a margin between these two as well. Volumes are up though, which started at a bottom price of 600 million ISK. We're recovering a little bit, but we're still trading a little bit below average for the Bargist. Then we've got the Macarial. Look at that, massive volume increase, big jump up from 400 million, less than that probably, to 421, 422 for the sellers, 382 for the buyers. There's clearly quite a bit of demand here in the Macarial market. Then we get the Nestor that is trading very strongly as well. Peak in September at around 800 million ISK. Now selling for 574, buyers at 530. So you can clearly see that that's pretty narrow margin on this one, and trading still well above average. Then we've got the Nightmare that's also doing quite well here, trading above 500, which is above its average, 525 to 580 for most Nightmares, 500 million for the buyers. They've been forced up to the average, so very strong performance again. Then we get the Balgorn. Oh, why the Macarial? Oh, that's of course explainable. The warp speed changes. CCP did increase warp speed on battleships, battle cruisers and cruisers across the board. Macarial, already the king of speed, is now even better in warp speed, and so yeah, that one came into the crosshairs of the market all of a sudden. Massive volumes and a nice jump in price on that one. So the Nightmare also doing well. We've got the Balgorn that dipped to 230, but is already back to 270 for the sellers, 244 for the buyers, and that's I'd call that above average. And then here is the big one, Rattlesnake, very close to a 1-year high point. Used to trade for like 400 to 450 million, now selling for 620 million ISK, 570 for the king of PvE. Very, very expensive. And then we've got the Vindicator that is in the very same thing. I think both of these conduit runners, right? It makes a lot of sense. You saw how good the Vindicator with the double web, especially if you do invest in faction webs that go out to 15 kilometers. I think you're also going to make very short work of the cruiser. I was not really willing to make that investment. We're then talking about close to 1 billion ISK on the ship, but it's selling for 640 million ISK. Buyers are coming in at 600 million ISK as well for the Vindicator. These two are at high points, super popular right now because of the emerging conduits. Of course, they are basically the best options to run these very, very quickly. Very impressive performance, of course. Next up, we still have the Navy faction battleships. Let's take a look at those. Apocalypse Navy issue, trying to give you guys basically like a cheaper opportunity in the latest conduit running video. 335 million for the sellers, 280 for the buyers, and clearly trading well below average. So this should mean that the Amar LP is pretty cheap at the moment. And well, you can still, grappler double web this one as well for basically a slightly less performing Vindicator, but it does have those 8 low slots, so it allows you to have a more comfortable tank, in my opinion, than even in the Vindicator, which is quite impressive. Next up, we've got the Armageddon Navy issue. Same thing, of course, trading close to 300 million, well below average. 343 for the sellers, 285 for the buyers. About half a Rattlesnake, about half a Vindicator, and potentially an option as well, of course. Then we've got the Dominic's Navy issue. That's actually the reverse, trading for around 500 million ISK. It's 516, lack of availability. Galente faction warfare must not be doing too well. The LP there is very expensive, and so we're trading these ships above average. Obviously, I think a Dominic's Navy issue would be an option as well for a conduit running ship. Let's take a quick look. Fittings, only 7 low slots, but you can still fit a very nice tank to that. It's got that drone bonus, and then you could, I think if I'm not mistaken, it's got 2, 4, 6 high points as well, so you could really have like a Vindicator like experience. Put some webs in those mid slots, you get 6 of them, and then go to town with both your drones, your powerful drones, but then also some blaster firepower as well. It could be a good option. Same with the Megatron Navy issue, I think, since that one then has bonuses, of course, and tracking speed could be, actually might be popular as well because of that, because we do have a bit of a breakout. It's now costing 555 million for the sellers, 470 for the buyers. Was already expensive because of the Galente LP, but we're clearly seeing this one shoot up as well. So maybe one to look into. Honestly, Megatron Navy issue could be very interesting as well. Basically a cheaper version of the Vindicator, but it might do almost as well. Raven Navy issue is then the Caldari faction warfare, which is obviously winning out a lot. High price 500 million, low price now 310 million for the sellers, 280 for the buyers. Yeah, if you want an investment on a possible turnaround in faction warfare, obviously try to grab a Raven Navy issue below 300 million ISK. It just makes a lot of sense. Scorpion Navy issue, same thing, actually going below 300 million ISK. On average 320 for the sellers, 280 for the buyers. And then for the Minmatar, that ought to be a bit more expensive. It's not as pronounced, actually going down, which is interesting. But yeah, least popular race, unfortunately, in EVE Online, 285 for the sellers, 250 for the buyers. Are there options there? Someone was asking for a Minmatar option for the conduits. I don't know, Tempest Fleet issue. Let's take a quick look at that. 5% to rate of fire and damage. And then slots, 8 highs, but only 6 guns, 7 lows. It could work, but I'm not sure. And then we get the Typhoon Fleet issue. Let's take a look at that one. That one was actually expensive. 1 year high point. Oh, good God. That's counter to my... But this is more in line with also Caldari Amar winning out. Galente Minmatar not winning out, so you start at an above average price of around 400 million ISK. Complete lack of availability, almost 600 million ISK for a Typhoon Fleet issue, which has, let's take a look at the trades here, heavy missile damage, large, no, yeah, unfortunately there's such a mixed bag. You can also see here that I'd say nope, these are not great options for conduit running compared to the others. But yeah, Typhoon Fleet issue, if you happen to have some of those lying around that you for instance bought for 300 million ISK, great time to sell. A lot of these are actually very expensive at the moment, and yeah, that's basically why I chose the faction battleships for the extra product this week. A lot of them are very expensive because of the emerging conduits. It's a very popular activity in EVE Online at the moment. I enjoy it as well. I especially like personally the fact that you can get in there with 3 strangers and still get out with the reward. There's far less need for competing or having to run it solo as being the optimal option on these emerging conduits. It also does allow for a little bit of cheesing as well. You could go in there, fire a shot just at the tail end and grab the LP. But as long as you're not getting punished for that, as long as it's not above 3, it's actually a pretty interesting system. And I think basically this category, especially here, Vindicator price, Rattlesnake price, Mackerel price, maybe I should look into that actually, are clear indicators that it's a very popular thing to run at the moment. And yeah, if you want a cheaper option, run Apocalypse Navy issue is pretty cheap at the moment. Megatron Navy issue is a bit more expensive, but this one actually works pretty damn well in my experience so far. And so yeah, battleships, faction battleships back on the menu thanks to the emerging conduits. That's it for this week then, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.